Nevada sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah Chen adjusted her grip on the M4A1 carbine, her calloused fingers finding their familiar position despite the tremor of nerves coursing through her body. The Blackwater training facility sprawled before her like a concrete cathedral of warfare, its imposing structures casting long shadows across the desert landscape. She had driven 18 hours straight from her small hometown in Oregon, surviving on gas station coffee and determination, just to be here among the elite tactical shooters who gathered annually for the most prestigious marksmanship competition in the country. At 26, Sarah possessed an unusual combination of quiet intensity and unassuming presence that seemed to make her nearly invisible in crowds. Her slight frame, barely reaching 5 feet 4 inches, was deceptive. Beneath her worn tactical pants and faded black t-shirt lay muscles carved by years of disciplined training and an iron will that had been forged in fires most people couldn't imagine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her almond-shaped eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond her years. The other competitors milled around the staging area with the casual confidence of seasoned professionals. Former Marines chatted in tight clusters, their conversation peppered with military jargon and shared memories of deployments. Ex-Delta Force operators methodically cleaned their weapons with ritualistic precision, their movements economical and practiced. Police SWAT team members compared gear configurations, their tactical vests bristling with equipment that cost more than most people's cars. These were men and women who had earned their place here through blood, sweat, and credentials that read like action movie scripts. Sarah felt their eyes on her as she quietly prepared her equipment at a corner bench, their gazes ranging from curious to dismissive. She could hear the whispered comments that weren't quite meant to be whispers, the kind of casual cruelty that people inflicted when they assumed someone didn't belong in their world. "Who's the tourist?" came a gravelly voice from a group of contractors near the ammunition depot. The speaker was a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks, his tactical vest straining against his bulk. Did someone's daughter get lost on her way to the mall? A ripple of laughter followed, the kind that felt like sandpaper against exposed skin. Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she continued her methodical preparation, checking her scope. Alignment with steady hands despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Maybe she's here for the Instagram photo op," suggested another voice, this one belonging to a lean man with a carefully groomed tactical beard and eyes like chips of ice. "Get some cool pictures with real operators, rack up those followers." Dudeness. Mockery continued to flow like poison honey, each comment designed to slice a little deeper than the last. They questioned her credentials, her right to be there, her very existence in their masculine domain. Some suggested she was probably someone's girlfriend tagging along to play dress-up soldier. Others wondered aloud if she had any idea what she was getting herself into, competing against real professionals who had earned their skills in places where mistakes meant death. Sarah absorbed it all with the stoic silence of someone who had learned long ago that words could only wound if you let them find their target. She had heard worse, survived worse, endured things that would have broken these weekend warriors who played at being tough. Her fingers traced unconsciously over her left forearm, where beneath the fabric of her long-sleeved shirt lay a tattoo that held more meaning than any medal or certificate these men could display. The range officer's voice cut through the morning, air like a blade, calling the competitors to their positions for the preliminary round. This was a precision shooting event, designed to test not just accuracy but mental fortitude under pressure. Targets would appear at varying distances, some static, others moving, all requiring split-second decisions and flawless execution. The course of fire would separate the pretenders from the professionals, the lucky from the lethal. As Sarah shouldered her rifle and moved toward her assigned lane, the comments followed her like a cloud of gnats. Someone made a crude joke about hoping she didn't shoot herself in the foot. Another suggested they should probably call an ambulance in advance. The laughter was sharp and exclusionary, designed to make her feel small and unwelcome in this temple of testosterone and tactical. expertise, but Sarah had faced down worse demons than playground bullies with expensive gear and inflated egos. She settled into her shooting position with the fluid grace of someone who had performed these movements thousands of times, her body finding that perfect balance between stability and flexibility that marked a true marksman. The rifle felt like an extension of her nervous system, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. The electronic target's downrange flickered to life, their sensors calibrated to register hits within fractions of inches. Wind flags hung limp in the desert stillness, providing no excuse for misses that would inevitably come from nerves or inadequate skill. This was pure shooting, stripped of all variables except the shooter's ability to deliver precise fire under pressure. The range fell silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning units struggling against the desert heat. Even the mockers grew quiet, their attention drawn to the ritual unfolding before them. In the world of precision shooting, credentials meant nothing once the first shot was fired. Reputation, experience, military service records, all of it became irrelevant in the face of that most democratic of measurements, where the bullet struck the target. Sarah's breathing slowed to a rhythm that had been ingrained through years of disciplined practice. Her heart rate dropped into that zone where time seemed to slow and the world narrowed to nothing more than sight picture, trigger control, and follow through. This was her sanctuary, the place where all the noise and chaos of the world fell away, leaving only the pure mathematics of ballistics and the quiet confidence that came from knowing she belonged here more than any of them could possibly understand. The command to commence firing rang out across the range, and Sarah's first shot broke clean and true, the sound of the rifle's report swallowed by the desert vastness. Downrange, the electronic scoring system registered a perfect center hit, the first of many that would soon silence the doubters and transform mockery into shocked respect. But that transformation was still to come, and for now, Sarah remained. Just another competitor in Lane 12, carrying secrets in her ink and skills in her hands that would soon rewrite every assumption her fellow shooters had made about the quiet woman who dared to stand among warriors. The morning rounds progressed. With mechanical precision, each competitor firing their allotted shots in the qualifying stages. Sarah's performance was nothing short of extraordinary, though she maintained the same quiet demeanor that had invited ridicule just hours before. Shot after shot found its mark with surgical precision, her groupings tight enough to cover with, a quarter at distances that challenged even the most experienced marksmen. The electronic scoring system displayed her results with cold mathematical certainty. Perfect tens, one after another, building a score that began to draw confused glances from competitors in adjacent lanes. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, the barrel-chested contractor who had first questioned her presence, found his swagger diminishing with each announcement of scores. His own shooting, while competent, paled in comparison to the quiet devastation being delivered downrange by the woman he had dismissed as a tourist. Between strings of fire, he watched her through his peripheral vision, trying to reconcile the clinical precision of her shooting with his preconceived notions about who belonged in their world. "Lucky streak," he muttered to his buddy Pete, though the conviction in his voice had begun to waver. Beginners sometimes get hot for a round or two before the pressure gets to them, but as the qualification rounds continued into the afternoon, Sarah's luck showed no signs of running out. Her rifle seemed to be an extension of her will, each shot placed exactly where she intended with a consistency that bordered on the supernatural. The other competitors found themselves stealing glances at her lane, their casual conversation gradually giving way to focused attention on the unfolding display of marksmanship mastery. The real twist began to emerge during the rapid-fire transition drills, when competitors were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances within strict time limits. This was where experience typically separated the elite from the merely skilled, where muscle memory and instinctive reactions mattered more than careful aim. Sarah approached the firing line with the same quiet confidence she had displayed all day, but something in her posture had shifted subtly, like a predator moving from rest to hunt. The buzzer sounded, and Sarah exploded into motion with a fluidity that left observers speechless. Her rifle seemed to dance between targets, each shot fired at precisely the moment her sight picture aligned, the time between shots measured in fractions of seconds rather than the deliberate pauses most shooters required. She moved through the course of fire like liquid mercury, transitioning between positions with an economy of movement that spoke of training that went far beyond weekend warrior status. But it was during the stress shoot, a grueling test that combined physical exertion with precision marksmanship, that the truth about Sarah Chen began to reveal itself. The course required competitors to complete a series of physically demanding obstacles before engaging targets at extreme distances, their bodies flooded with adrenaline and their breathing compromised by exertion. Most shooters saw their accuracy degrade significantly under these conditions, their carefully practiced techniques crumbling under the dual pressure of physical stress and time constraints. Sarah attacked the obstacle course with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything else. She scaled walls, crawled under barriers, and sprinted between stations with a level of fitness that clearly went beyond casual gym membership. Her movements were efficient and practiced, each step calculated to conserve energy while maintaining speed. When she reached the final shooting position, a prone position behind a concrete barrier 600 meters from a series of steel targets, she dropped into place as if she had done this exact evolution 1,000 times before. Her breathing settled. Within seconds, her heart rate dropping from the elevated rhythm of physical exertion to the controlled cadence of precision shooting. The first shot rang out clean and true, the distant ping of steel confirming another perfect hit. She worked through the target array methodically, each shot placed with the same surgical precision she had displayed all day, despite the physical demands that had left other competitors struggling to maintain basic accuracy. It was then that Commander James Mitchell arrived at the range, his presence immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the Special Operations community. At 42, Mitchell carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had led men into combat and brought them home again. His weathered face bore the subtle scars that came from years of operations in hostile environments, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a predator who had survived by reading situations and people with deadly accuracy. Mitchell had not come to the range as a spectator. He was conducting informal recruitment, watching for individuals whose skills and temperament might translate well to the specialized units under his command. The Navy SEALs were always seeking exceptional talent, and civilian competition sometimes revealed capabilities that traditional military channels missed. He moved through the crowd of competitors with casual confidence, his presence drawing respectful nods from those who recognized his reputation. The commander's attention was initially drawn to the expected standouts, former military personnel whose background suggested advanced training and combat experience. But as he studied the ongoing competition, his focus gradually shifted to Lane 12, where a slight Asian woman was systematically dismantling targets with a level of precision that made seasoned operators look like enthusiastic amateurs. "Who's that?" Mitchell asked the range officer, nodding toward Sarah's position. "Sarah Chen," came the reply, along with a shrug that suggested the range officer was as puzzled by her performance as everyone else. "Nobody knows much about her. Showed up this morning, paid her entry fee, and has been absolutely smoking the competition ever since. The other shooters were giving her grief earlier, figured she was some kind of wannabe. Now they're not sure what to think." Mitchell watched Sarah complete another string of fire, noting not just the precision of her shots but the way she carried herself, the economy of her movements, the complete absence of wasted motion that characterized truly elite performers. There was something familiar about her shooting style, something that tugged at memories of advanced training courses and classified operations. As Sarah finished her final string and began to clear her weapon, she rolled up her sleeves in the desert heat, finally revealing the tattoo that had remained hidden beneath her long-sleeved shirt all day. The design was intricate and meaningful, clearly the work of a skilled artist, but it was the specific imagery that caused Commander Mitchell's breath to catch in his throat. The tattoo depicted a trident emerging from stylized waves, but this wasn't the generic naval imagery that civilians sometimes chose for decoration. The details were too precise, too specific, too authentic to be anything other than the real thing. Surrounding the trident were coordinates that Mitchell recognized with crystal clarity. They marked a location in Afghanistan where a classified operation had taken place 3 years earlier, an operation that had required the kind of skills Sarah had been demonstrating all day. But that wasn't what made Mitchell's pulse quicken. Beneath the trident, rendered in elegant script that somehow managed to be both beautiful and deadly serious, were the words Team 7, in letters that seemed to shimmer with meaning beyond their simple appearance. Mitchell knew that designation, knew what it represented, and knew that there were fewer than a dozen people in the world authorized to wear that particular marking on their skin. The problem was, according to every official record Mitchell had access to, all members of Team 7 were accounted for in the military databases, and none of them were named Sarah Chen. Team 7 was a highly classified unit that officially didn't exist, operating under the deepest levels of government. Secrecy. The team had been disbanded 18 months ago after their final mission, its members reassigned to other duties or transitioned out of active service entirely. Mitchell's mind raced through possibilities as he watched Sarah pack her equipment, with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Could she be the spouse of a Team 7 member, wearing their ink as some form of memorial? That seemed unlikely given the classification levels involved and the strict prohibitions against sharing operational details with family members. Could she be some kind of imposter? Someone who had somehow obtained classified information and chosen to display it as body art? That possibility seemed even more remote, given that anyone with access to Team 7 intelligence would know better than to advertise that knowledge so openly. There was a third possibility, one that seemed impossible, but which would explain everything Mitchell had witnessed on the range that day. It was a possibility that challenged everything he thought he knew about Team 7 and raised questions that could only be answered through direct confrontation. As Sarah finished securing her rifle case and prepared to leave the range, Mitchell made a decision that would change both their lives in ways neither could anticipate. He began walking toward Lane 12, his mind already formulating the questions that needed to be asked and preparing for answers that might rewrite his understanding of the most classified operation he had ever been associated with. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the concrete as Mitchell closed the distance between them, each step carrying him deeper into a mystery that had been hidden in plain sight. Sarah sensed his approach with the kind of situational awareness that only came from years of training in environments where inattention meant death, and she turned to face the approaching SEAL commander with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. The moment of truth was approaching, when secrets would be revealed and assumptions would be shattered, when the quiet woman who had been ridiculed by weekend warriors would finally show her true colors to someone who would recognize them for exactly what they were. The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the promise of revelations that would change everything for everyone involved. Commander Mitchell's approach was measured and deliberate, each step calculated to project authority without appearing threatening. In his years of leadership within the Special Operations community, he had learned to read people with the same precision that Sarah had demonstrated on the firing line, and what he saw in her posture as she turned to face him sent a chill of recognition down his spine. She moved with the fluid awareness of someone who had been trained to assess threats and respond with lethal efficiency, her body language shifting subtly from civilian competitor to something far more dangerous. "Ma'am," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the gravitas of command while maintaining a respectful tone. "I'm Commander James Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I couldn't help but notice your shooting today. Impressive work." Sarah's eyes met his without flinching, and in that moment Mitchell saw something that confirmed his growing suspicions. There was no surprise in her gaze, no civilian's typical awe when meeting a SEAL commander. Instead, he saw the steady regard of someone who was used to operating at the highest levels of military hierarchy, someone who understood the weight of the titles and clearances that others found intimidating. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice carrying a crisp professionalism that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The casual demeanor she had maintained all day was suddenly replaced by something that looked remarkably like military bearing, though she had never officially saluted or acknowledged his rank in any formal way. Mitchell studied her face, searching for recognition in features that seemed tantalizingly familiar, yet impossible to place. "I noticed your tattoo," he said carefully, the words carrying more weight than their simple construction suggested. "That's some very specific artwork you've got there. The coordinates are particularly interesting." A shadow passed across. Sarah's features, so brief that someone less trained in reading micro-expressions might have missed it entirely. But Mitchell caught it, filed it away with the dozen other tells he had already cataloged in their brief interaction. She knew exactly what those coordinates meant, knew their significance with the intimate familiarity of someone who had been there when they mattered most. "It commemorates someone important to me," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. "Someone who didn't make it home from that location." The answer was technically truthful but deliberately misleading, and Mitchell recognized the evasion tactics of someone trained in compartmentalized information security. It was the kind of response that satisfied curiosity without revealing operational details, the sort of verbal misdirection that intelligence operatives learned to deploy instinctively. "Team 7, Mitchell said quietly, his voice dropping to a register that wouldn't carry to the other competitors still milling around the range. "That's not a designation you see every day." This time, Sarah's reaction was impossible to miss. Her entire body went still with a predatory alertness that raised every instinct Mitchell had developed through years of combat operations. For just a moment, she looked like someone preparing to fight or flee, her weight shifting almost imperceptibly onto the balls of her feet, her hands moving closer to positions where concealed weapons might be accessed. "I think you might be mistaken about what you think you're seeing," Sarah said, but her voice carried undertones that suggested she knew exactly how hollow that denial sounded. Mitchell stepped closer, closing the distance between them to a range where their conversation couldn't be overheard by curious onlookers. 3 years ago, Team 7 conducted a high-value target elimination in the Kunar province of Afghanistan. The coordinates on your arm mark the exact location where that operation took place. The mission was so classified that fewer than 20 people in the entire military establishment even knew it happened. Sarah's facade began to crack, and Mitchell could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. Years of training, warred with the relief of potentially being able to speak freely to someone who might understand the burdens she had been carrying in silence. The official records show that Team 7 consisted of 6 operators. Mitchell continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting classified information. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, the team leader. Petty Officer First Class. David Kim, Communications Specialist. Sergeant First Class Robert Jackson, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Petty Officer Second Class Amanda Rodriguez, Medical Corps. Sergeant Marcus Williams, Designated Marksman. And Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Intelligence Liaison and Secondary Sniper. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow, and for the first time since Mitchell had approached her, genuine emotion flickered across her features. Hearing her real name, her real rank, spoken aloud after 18 months of civilian anonymity was both a relief and a terror that left her momentarily speechless. Lieutenant Chen was officially listed as killed in action during that operation, Mitchell said, his voice softening slightly as he watched the impact of his words. Her body was never recovered due to the tactical situation on the ground. The team had to evacuate under heavy enemy fire, leaving her behind in a cave system that was subsequently destroyed by airstrikes to prevent enemy intelligence gathering. Sarah's breathing had become carefully controlled, the kind of respiratory discipline that prevented emotional breakdown during critical situations. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of every day she had spent living a lie. Every moment she had been forced to pretend that Lieutenant Sarah Chen had died in those Afghan mountains. The cave system had a secondary exit. She said quietly, the words coming out like a confession that had been held back for too long. I made it out 3 days after the airstrike, badly wounded and suffering from severe blood loss. A local village found me, nursed me back to health without knowing who I was or what I'd been doing there. Mitchell felt pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align in ways that challenged everything he thought he understood about military protocols and official records. Why didn't you make contact? Why didn't you extract through proper channels? The question hung in the desert air like a blade, and Sarah's answer, when it came, carried the bitterness of someone who had learned the hardest possible lessons about institutional loyalty and personal survival. Because 2 days before our mission launched, I intercepted intelligence suggesting that Team 7 had been compromised, Sarah said, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone delivering an operational briefing. Someone with high-level clearance had leaked our mission parameters to hostile forces. The ambush we walked into wasn't random. It was specifically designed to eliminate our team. Mitchell's expression hardened as the implications of her words sank in. If what she was saying was true, then Team 7 had been deliberately sacrificed by someone within their own command structure, sent into a kill zone by someone who knew exactly what would happen to them. I spent those 3 days in the cave system listening to enemy communications, Sarah continued. My Dari and Pashto were good enough to understand what they were saying, and what I heard confirmed my worst fears. They knew our call signs, our equipment loadouts, our extraction protocols. Someone had sold us out, and when I realized that making contact might expose me to whoever had arranged our elimination, I made the decision to stay dead. The weight of her revelation settled between them like a physical presence. Mitchell understood the impossible position she had found herself in, trapped between a hostile enemy that wanted her dead and potentially traitorous allies who might want the same thing. In that situation, disappearing entirely might have been the only rational choice. I spent 6 months recovering in that village, learning to live without military medical care, without support networks, without any of the infrastructure that makes survival possible in hostile territory, Sarah said. When I was finally strong enough to travel, I made my way to Pakistan, then to a U.S. embassy in Islamabad. But by then, I had been officially declared dead for over 4 months, and approaching official channels meant revealing that I had survived, which could potentially expose whatever investigation might be ongoing into the intelligence leak. Mitchell processed the tactical and political complexities of her situation with the analytical mind of someone trained in unconventional warfare scenarios. Her choices, viewed through the lens of someone operating without support in a compromised command structure, began to make a brutal kind of sense. "So you came home as a ghost," he said, understanding beginning to dawn in his voice. "New identity, new life, staying off any radar that might connect you to Lieutenant Sarah Chen." "The paperwork was easier than you might think," Sarah replied, with a bitter smile. Sarah Chen was a relatively common name, and there were enough legitimate Sarah Chens in the civilian population to provide cover for someone who knew how to manipulate identity documentation. I had been trained in those techniques as part of my intelligence specialization. The enormity of what she had accomplished, surviving combat, navigating hostile territory, creating a new identity, and living successfully under deep cover for over a year, struck Mitchell with the force of professional admiration, mixed with profound sadness for what she had been forced to endure alone. "The shooting," Mitchell said, pieces continuing to fall into place. "You've been maintaining your skills." "Every day," Sarah confirmed. "I couldn't let myself get soft, couldn't allow the edge to diminish. Part of it was practical. I didn't know if whoever betrayed Team 7 might eventually discover that I had survived, and I needed to be ready to defend myself. But part of it was something deeper. Those skills, that training, They were the last connection I had to who I really was. Mitchell understood the psychological component of her dedication to marksmanship with the insight of someone who had seen how identity and capability became intertwined in the minds of elite operators. For Sarah, maintaining her shooting skills wasn't just about readiness. It was about preserving the last fragments of Lieutenant Sarah Chen in a world that had declared her dead and forgotten. "And now?" Mitchell asked, the question carrying implications that extended far beyond their current conversation. Sarah looked out across the desert landscape, her eyes focusing on distances that seemed to extend beyond the physical horizon. When she turned back to Mitchell, he saw a resolution that hadn't been there moments before, as if speaking the truth aloud had rekindled something that had been dormant but never extinguished. "Now I need to know who betrayed my team," she said, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone making a commitment that would reshape their entire existence. "I need to know why 5 good operators had to die, and I need to make sure that whoever was responsible understands that Lieutenant Sarah Chen didn't stay dead after all." The promise in her words carried the weight of professional competence backed by personal vendetta, and Mitchell realized that he was looking at someone who had been transformed by impossible circumstances into something that existed outside normal military or civilian categories. Sarah Chen had become something new, something dangerous, something that the people responsible for Team 7's destruction should probably be very afraid of encountering. As the desert sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the shooting range, Mitchell made a decision that would bind his fate to hers in ways neither of them could fully anticipate. Whatever came next would require resources, intelligence networks, and operational support that only someone with his clearance levels could provide. The hunt for the truth about Team 7 was about to begin in earnest, and it would be conducted by 2 people who understood that some betrayals demanded a reckoning that went far beyond official channels or legal proceedings. The safe house the Commander Mitchell had arranged sat nestled in the hills outside Las Vegas, a nondescript ranch-style building that looked like 1,000 other retirement homes scattered across Nevada's suburban sprawl. But beneath its mundane exterior lay the sophisticated infrastructure of a government black site. Reinforced walls, advanced communications equipment, and security systems that could detect threats long before they became actionable problems. It was here, 3 days after their encounter at the shooting range, that Sarah found herself staring at classified documents that had been officially buried so deep that their very existence was a state secret. Mitchell had worked his contacts, with the ruthless efficiency of someone who understood that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. If Sarah's survival became known to the wrong people, her life expectancy could be measured in hours rather than days. The intelligence networks that had failed to detect the original betrayal of Team 7 were still operational, still connected, to whoever had orchestrated that deadly ambush in the Afghan mountains. "Deputy Director Marcus Holbrook," Mitchell said, sliding a photograph across the polished oak table that dominated the safe house's main room. CIA, Special Activities Division. He had oversight authority for Team 7's mission parameters and access to all operational intelligence. Sarah studied the photograph with the clinical attention she had once applied to target identification. Holbrook was a man in his early 50s, with the soft features of someone who had spent his career behind desks rather than in operational theaters. His eyes held the calculating intelligence of a professional survivor, someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of Washington politics long enough to accumulate real power. He's also the only person outside of Team 7 itself who knew about the intelligence breakthrough that led to the mission, Mitchell continued, spreading additional documents across the table. 2 weeks before your team deployed, Signals Intelligence intercepted communications that pinpointed the location of Khalid Rahman, the bomb maker responsible for the IED attacks that killed 37 American soldiers over the previous 6 months. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow, dragging her back to that briefing room in Bagram Air Base where she had first learned about their target. Rahman wasn't just another insurgent. He was a ghost who had eluded capture for 2 years, a technical genius whose improvised explosive devices had evolved into works of deadly art that killed with surgical precision. The intelligence that located him had been considered the breakthrough that could save dozens of American lives. "Rahman was never captured," Sarah said quietly, the words carrying the weight of professional failure mixed with personal loss. "The compound we hit was empty, except for the ambush force that was waiting for us." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Because Rahman had been warned. 24 hours before Team 7 inserted, he disappeared from that location, leaving behind a carefully prepared kill zone that was designed specifically to eliminate your team. The enemy knew your approach routes, your equipment capabilities, your standard operating procedures. They knew everything." The implications crystallized in Sarah's mind with the clarity that came from years of intelligence analysis. Someone hadn't just leaked information about Team 7's mission, they had actively collaborated with the enemy to ensure the team's destruction while allowing Rahman to escape. It wasn't simple betrayal, it was calculated murder disguised as operational failure. "But why?" Sarah asked, though even as the question left her lips she began to understand the darker possibilities that Mitchell's investigation had uncovered. What could Holbrook possibly gain from betraying an American military unit? Mitchell pulled out another file, this one marked with classification levels that made Sarah's security clearance look like a library card. Holbrook had been running an off-the-books operation in Afghanistan, using his access to special operations units to eliminate targets that weren't on any official kill list. Private contracts, personal vendettas, political opponents. He was, essentially, running a murder-for-hire service using American military assets. The scope of the corruption began to dawn on Sarah with a horror that went beyond personal betrayal. If Mitchell's intelligence was accurate, then Team 7 hadn't been the first unit to be sacrificed for Holbrook's illegal operations. They were simply the most recent victims in a pattern of systematic abuse that had been hidden behind the classified veil of special operations secrecy. Rahman wasn't just a bomb maker, Mitchell continued, his voice taking on the hard edge of someone delivering a briefing on enemy capabilities. He was also Holbrook's primary contact with insurgent networks throughout the region. Rahman had been feeding intelligence to the CIA about rival insurgent groups, allowing Holbrook to eliminate competing factions while building his own network of controlled opposition. Sarah felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place with the mechanical precision of a rifle bolt cycling. Team 7's mission would have eliminated Holbrook's primary asset and exposed his illegal network. So he sacrificed us to protect his operation. 5 American soldiers died so that Marcus Holbrook could continue using U.S. military forces as his personal assassination squad, Mitchell confirmed, the disgust in his voice barely contained. The official investigation into Team 7's failure was headed by Holbrook himself, ensuring that the real causes of the mission compromise were never discovered. The revelation hit Sarah with a combination of rage and vindication that left her momentarily speechless. For 18 months, she had lived with the knowledge that her team had been betrayed, but she had never imagined the scope of the conspiracy or the depth of the corruption that had led to their deaths. Knowing the truth brought a strange kind of peace, even as it fueled a determination for justice that burned like molten steel in her chest. "He's still operational," Mitchell said, anticipating her next question. "Holbrook's network has expanded since Team 7's elimination. Without Rahman's intelligence to limit his activities, he's been able to establish contracts throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. Current estimates suggest he's responsible for over 40 unauthorized killings in the past 2 years." Sarah stood and walked to the safe house's reinforced windows, looking out at the Nevada landscape while her mind processed the tactical implications of what Mitchell had revealed. 40 more deaths. 40 more families destroyed by a man who had already murdered her teammates and stolen her identity. The mathematics of justice demanded a response that went beyond official channels or legal proceedings. "What's the evidence?" she asked, her voice taking on the professional tone she had used during intelligence briefings years ago. How much of this can be proven in a court of law versus how much is operational intelligence that can't be officially acknowledged? Mitchell's silence answered her question before he spoke. Most of it comes from sources that would compromise ongoing operations if they were revealed publicly. The official record still shows Team 7 as a mission failure due to faulty intelligence, and Holbrook's network operates under so many layers of plausible deniability that connecting him to specific killings would be nearly impossible. So he's untouchable through legal channels, Sarah said, understanding the impossible position they found themselves in. Protected by the same classification systems that are supposed to protect American operations. There are other options, Mitchell said carefully, his words carrying implications that both of them understood perfectly. Holbrook's network makes him vulnerable in ways that legal prosecution doesn't address. He operates in environments where accidents happen, where people disappear, where the normal rules of civilized society don't apply. Sarah turned back to face him, and Mitchell saw something in her expression that reminded him why Team 7 had been considered one of the most effective special operations units in the military. Behind her civilian facade, Lieutenant Sarah Chen was still very much alive, and she was beginning to contemplate actions that would have been unthinkable to the woman who had competed at the shooting range just days earlier. "You're talking about an assassination," she said, the words carrying no judgment or shock, just professional assessment of tactical options. "I'm talking about justice," Mitchell replied. "Holbrook has been operating outside the law for years, using his position to commit crimes that have cost dozens of American lives. If the legal system can't touch him, then maybe it's time to apply different standards of accountability." The proposition hung between them like a live wire, carrying currents of moral complexity that neither of them could fully navigate without confronting fundamental questions about duty, loyalty, and the price of justice. Sarah had spent 18 months living with the knowledge that her teammates' deaths had been orchestrated by someone who walked free, protected by the very system they had died serving. The opportunity for direct action was both terrifying and irresistible. "Holbrook maintains a private residence in the Virginia horse country," Mitchell said, sliding another set of documents across the table. "He spends weekends there, away from the security apparatus that protects him in Washington. The location is isolated, defensible, but not impregnable to someone with the right skills and motivation." Sarah studied the reconnaissance photographs and tactical assessments that Mitchell had compiled, her mind automatically beginning to formulate approach routes, target identification procedures, and extraction protocols. The training that had kept her alive in Afghanistan was still there, waiting to be applied to a very different kind of mission. "This isn't just about revenge," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was trying to convince. "Holbrook's network is still operational, still killing people. Eliminating him could save lives. 43 active contracts according to our latest intelligence," Mitchell confirmed. "Military personnel, intelligence assets, foreign nationals who have provided assistance to American operations, all of them targets because someone paid Holbrook to arrange their deaths." The scope of potential lives saved provided a utilitarian justification for what they were contemplating, but Sarah knew that her primary motivation was far more personal. The faces of her teammates, Torres, Kim, Jackson, Rodriguez, Williams, haunted her dreams with the persistence of unfinished business. They deserved justice, and if the system couldn't provide it, then she would. "I need to see his security arrangements," Sarah said, the words marking a point of no return that both of them recognized. "I need to understand his patterns, his vulnerabilities, his support network. This can't be a crime of passion. It has to be surgical, precise, untraceable." Mitchell opened another file, revealing surveillance photographs and detailed reports that represented months of careful preparation. "I've been developing this contingency since I first started investigating Team 7's failure," he admitted. "When I realized the scope of Holbrook's corruption, I began to understand that official justice might not be possible. The revelation that Mitchell had been planning Holbrook's elimination for months added another layer of complexity to their situation. This wasn't a spontaneous decision driven by emotional revelation. It was a carefully considered operation that had been developed with the same professional standards that governed legitimate military actions. Over the next several hours, they worked through the tactical details with the methodical precision that had once made them effective operators in their respective fields. Sarah's intelligence background complemented Mitchell's operational experience, creating a planning synergy that transformed their initial concept into a viable mission profile. Holbrook's weekend routine was predictable enough to be exploited. He arrived at his Virginia estate every Friday evening, usually alone or with a small security detail of private contractors. The property was large enough to provide concealment for infiltration, but isolated enough that collateral damage would be minimal. Local law enforcement response times were lengthy due to the rural location, providing an extended window for operational completion and extraction. The shot would have to be taken from here, Sarah said, pointing to a wooded ridge that overlooked Holbrook's property from approximately 800 meters. It's within my effective range, provides good concealment, and offers multiple exit routes. Mitchell studied the topographical map with the eye of someone trained in small unit tactics. Security cameras cover the immediate approaches to the house, but they don't extend into the tree line. If you could get into position during darkness and wait for a morning opportunity, you'd have natural light for target identification without electronic detection. The technical aspects of the assassination began to take shape with the inexorable logic of a well-planned military operation. They discussed equipment requirements, timing considerations, and contingency protocols with the same professional detachment they would have brought to any legitimate mission briefing. But beneath the tactical planning lay emotional currents that neither of them could entirely ignore. For Sarah, this operation represented the culmination of 18 months of survivor's guilt and enforced invisibility. For Mitchell, it was a reckoning with the institutional failures that had allowed a corrupt official to murder American soldiers with impunity. After this, there's no going back, Mitchell said as they concluded their planning session. If we do this, we're crossing a line that changes everything about who we are and what we represent. Sarah looked at the photographs of her dead teammates one final time, their faces staring back at her with the silent accusation of unfinished business. Torres with his infectious laugh, Kim with his technical brilliance, Jackson with his unshakable courage, Rodriguez with her healing hands, Williams with his steady reliability, all of them reduced to official casualty statistics in a classified file that would never see justice through legal channels. They were my responsibility, she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that had haunted her for 18 months. I was the intelligence specialist. I should have detected the betrayal before it got them killed. Maybe I can't change what happened to them, but I can make sure that the person responsible understands that Lieutenant Sarah Chen remembers her debts. Mitchell nodded, understanding that some decisions transcended legal or moral categories, and entered the realm of personal honor that defined the warrior ethos. They would proceed with the operation not because it was legally justified, but because some betrayals demanded a response that existed outside the boundaries of civilized society. As the Nevada sun disappeared behind the western mountains, casting the safe house into shadows that seemed to mirror the moral complexity of their situation, Sarah began the final preparations for a mission that would either bring justice to her fallen teammates or transform her into the very thing she had once sworn to protect against. The woman who had been ridiculed at the shooting range was gone forever, replaced by something harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. The hunt for Marcus Holbrook was about to begin, and it would be conducted according to rules that existed only in the spaces between official law and personal conscience, where the ghosts of Team 7 waited for their final mission to be completed by the operator who had survived to carry their memory into battle one last time.